From 1973 to 1976, I lived in a tiny, small universe, working at a tiny, small art school on the coast of Maine. It was right about that time that art got into its 1957 Chevrolet and hit the streets, never looked back. People already knew about Christo and the curtain on Rifle Gap, so there was bound to be trouble. So art packed up its tattered valise and left us all a postcard that said, "I'm on my way. Put a key under the mat." Tom Wolfe did. It was the key that told me what happened to art before it left the studio and hit the street. At about that same time, Playboy magazine ran a cartoon, An Artist Looks at Heaven. In that one, it said, Morris Louis is there, and he has all of his paintings with him. The paintings drew me in. They taught me how to think without words, and I knew that I was almost ready to get out of the studio and hit the street. So fortunately, though, I ran into Joseph Beuys. He was explaining art to a dead rabbit. Beuys coined the phrase, "Jeder Mensch ist ein Künstler." Oh yeah, there was trouble with that one. And it reminded me at age 8, I was told I couldn't be in art class. My paintings were too unrealistic. They looked like this, without the unicorn. And so I didn't paint or draw for another 20 years. And then I met Henry Moore, the sculptor. He said everyone should draw every day. He was drawing sheep, and more sheep. So I started to draw. I got a sketchbook, and for 30 days, I drew a self-portrait every day. And during that time period, something strange started to happen. I started to see patterns and colors and things that simply didn't exist before I actually drew them. So I felt like I was ready to get out of the studio and hit the street when Yoko Ono stopped me in my tracks. I cut off a piece of her clothing like my grandmother, chipping off a bit of Plymouth Rock, and I certainly never knew what lay ahead for her or for the rest of us. Meanwhile, art was out of the studio and hitting the street, but it was a little more crafty this time. Art rented a vacant lot and filled it with snarling, rabid German shepherds and called it Protection Piece. So, can you dig that? Meanwhile, art went out of the studio, got into the streets, and found itself a van. With the van, it could do anything it wanted. It started to drive across country, bury cars in sand, and always just stay ahead of the pitchforks and torches. Meanwhile, I fell in love with Robert Smithson. His medium of choice, planet Earth. And so I flew over Arches National Park, over the Mormon Tabernacle, and right to the spiral jetty in the middle of the Great Salt Lake. So Smithson had a plan for the jetty. He knew it would always change. The colors would waver, the salt would accumulate, debris would pile up, and he said one seizes the spiral and the spiral becomes a seizure. I stopped saying goodbye. I would only say seizure. Meanwhile, another traveler started making prints and photographs on really cheap paper. This was a gift of disintegration that went to art museums everywhere. But in 1985, he showed up on Love Boat. So where were the people with pitchforks and torches then? Were they looking for obscenity? They were way too late. Vito Acconci had already done his masturbation piece, and art had moved out of the studio and into the museum, where often it was asked to leave again. This happened to Lynn Neeson. She told me that her piece had to go into a motel, where it was quite fine until somebody called the police. She still doesn't know what happened. My piece in Portland, Maine, involved a lot of pink plastic flamingos. They were also apprehended by the police. We thought they were safe. They were right there on the corner where you and I kissed that time in the rain, and the cars went by, the pitchforks and torches in the back seats. But art now had a plan. It had a map. And Terry Allen released his landmark album, Juarez, and I learned to sing the rock writer's song, I Never Met a Rock That I Couldn't Make Talk Right On. Doug Hubler sold a whole bunch of nothing, mailed packages to himself, created postmarks across the country. Eleanor Anton had 100 boots she photographed 50 times, and there was the Red Couch Project. It's still going on. Ed Ruscha photographed every single building on Sunset Strip. And I knew I was ready to get out of the studio and hit the street. And when I had a baby boy, I leaned over his crib and I said, Yoko Ono is an artist in her own right. And when I saw the astronaut suicides, I went right back to 1972 and the Stack of Wheat murders. And when I'm invited to a book report party, I make up a book and report on that. When I see plastic dinosaurs in a garden, I know that they are ready to get out of the tar pits and hit the streets, and I hope you have your pitchforks and torches ready. Seizure.